The cemetery was quiet, the kind of quiet that made Jack Delaney's boots sound too loud against the gravel path. 20 years had passed since he last stood here, and yet the weight in his chest felt just as heavy as the day they lowered Michael's casket into the ground. The autumn wind tugged at the folded American flag in his hands, its edges frayed from years of being stored in a box he couldn't bring himself to open. He hadn't earned this flag, Michael had. It should have been Michael's family receiving it, not him. But Michael didn't have family. At least that's what Jack had always believed. The headstone was simple, letters weathered but still clear. Private First Class Michael Torres, beloved son, loyal friend. Jack knelt, his knees protesting against the cold earth. He ran his fingers over the engraved dates, too close together, too short a life. "I should have been the one," he muttered, the words scraping his throat. The ambush played in his mind like a broken reel gunfire. Smoke. Michael, shoving him out of the way just as the explosion ripped through the street. The last thing Jack remembered was Michael's face, streaked with dirt and blood, shouting at him to run. A rustle of fabric broke his thoughts. Jack turned his head slightly, catching movement in his periphery. A woman stood a few graves away, her long coat flapping in the wind. She wasn't just passing by, she was staring at Michael's grave, her posture stiff like she was holding her breath. Jack hesitated, then stood, brushing dirt from his pants. "Ma'am," he called softly. "Did you know Michael?" The woman didn't answer. For a moment she didn't even move. Then, without a glance in his direction, she turned and walked away, her steps quickening as she vanished between the rows of white headstones. Jack stared after her, a knot forming in his gut. Who was she? Michael never mentioned a woman, no girlfriend, no close friends outside the unit. The way she'd stood there. It wasn't the stance of a stranger. It was grief. The same grief that had clung to Jack for 2 decades, that night. In the dim glow of a motel lamp, Jack spread Michael's old letters across the bed. He'd kept them all these years, though he'd never been able to read them more than once. Now he scanned each line, searching for a name, a clue, anything that might explain the woman's presence. There was nothing. Just jokes about bad rations, complaints about the heat, and the occasional vague reference to something big he couldn't talk about. Jack exhaled, rubbing his temples. Maybe he was imagining things. Maybe the guilt was messing with his head. But then his fingers brushed against an envelope he didn't recognize, thicker than the others, sealed but never opened. Scrawled on the front in Michael's messy handwriting was a single word: Alina. The envelope felt heavy in Jack's hands, as if whatever secrets it held had weight beyond the paper. He turned it over, his thumb tracing the edges where the glue had yellowed with age. Alina. The name echoed in his mind, unfamiliar yet suddenly vital. Why had Michael never mentioned her? And why had this letter been tucked away, separate from the others, like it was never meant to be found? Jack hesitated for only a second before carefully peeling open the seal. Inside was a single sheet of paper, covered in Michael's rushed script words written in haste, maybe even fear. Jack, if you're reading this, something went wrong. Don't trust the reports. Don't trust anyone from the unit. There's a leak, and it goes higher than we thought. They know about Alina. If I don't make it back, find her. Not just some local, she's everything. She might be the only one who knows the truth. The letter ended abruptly. No signature, no goodbye, just a jagged ink smudge like the pen had been snatched away mid-sentence. Jack's pulse hammered in his throat. A leak? A betrayal? He'd replayed that ambush 1,000 times, blaming bad intel, bad luck, but never one of their own. And who the hell was Alina? Not just a translator, not just a fling. She's everything. The words burned. Michael had been planning a future with her, and Jack had never even known she existed. The next morning, Jack drove back to the cemetery before dawn, the letter crumpled in his pocket like a confession. The gates were still locked, so he leaned against his truck, watching the horizon bleed from black to gray. He needed to see that woman again, needed to know if she was the Alina from the letter. But more than that, he needed answers about the ambush, about the betrayal Michael had died trying to expose. The rising sun painted the headstones in pale gold when he finally spotted her. She moved like a shadow between the graves, stopping in the same spot as before, her coat wrapped tight against the chill. This time Jack didn't wait. He strode toward her, the photo of their unit clutched in one hand, a snapshot of Younger. Faces grinning under the desert sun, oblivious to what was coming. "Alina," he said, and she stiffened, her shoulders tightening like she'd been struck. Slowly she turned, and up close, Jack could see the dark circles under her eyes. The way her fingers trembled before she shoved them into her pockets. "You're Jack," she whispered. "Not a question. In fact, he talked about you. Said you'd come for me if he couldn't." Her voice was raw, like she hadn't used it in years. Jack's breath caught. "You knew this would happen." Alina glanced around, her gaze darting toward the cemetery gates like she expected someone to be watching. "Not here," she muttered. "They told me to stay away. From you, from his grave, from all of it. They." The word hung between them, loaded. Jack reached into his pocket and pulled out the letter. Lena's eyes locked onto it, and for the first time her mask slipped grief, fury, something unnameable, flashing across her face. "You read it?" she said flatly. Jack nodded. "I need to know what happened, who they are. Why Michael thought someone set us up." Alina let out a shaky breath, her next words so quiet he almost missed them. "Because they did. And the man who gave the order, is not just alive, he's powerful now." She met Jack's eyes, and in that moment he saw it the same look Michael had in those final seconds. Not fear, warning. "If you really want the truth," she said, "you'd better be ready for what it costs." The diner was nearly empty, just the hum of an old ceiling fan and the occasional clatter of dishes from the kitchen. Jack chose the booth farthest from the door, his back to the wall out of habit, his eyes scanning the parking lot through the smudged window. Alina sat across from him, her hands wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched. The steam had long since faded, but she kept staring into it like the answers might surface in the dark liquid. Jack waited, giving her time. He knew that. Looked the kind of silence that came before confession. Finally she spoke, her voice low but steady. He found proof. She reached into her bag and slid a folded photograph across the table. It was grainy surveillance style, but the faces were unmistakable. Their former commanding officer, Captain Daniel Riker, standing with a known insurgent leader in a dusty alley, shaking hands like old friends. Jack's stomach twisted. Riker had been a hard-ass, sure, but this was treason. "When was this taken?" he asked, his fingers tightening on the photo. Elena's jaw clenched. 3 days before the ambush, Michael was following him. He thought Riker was selling out patrol routes, troop movements, anything the enemy would pay for. And then she trailed off. But Jack knew. Too convenient. To clean, Jack leaned forward, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Why you? Why did they relocate you instead of just—" He didn't finish the thought, but Elena's bitter smile told him she understood. "Because I had copies of everything. Photos, recordings, coordinates. Michael made sure of that. They couldn't risk killing me without knowing where I'd hidden it all. So, they protected me instead. New name, new life, but always watching. I spent years looking over my shoulder, waiting for them to decide I was more trouble than I was worth, and then you showed up." He'd walked into something bigger than he'd realized, bigger than just uncovering the truth about Michael's death. This was about exposing a traitor who'd gotten away with murder literally. Riker wasn't just some washed-up soldier now. He'd parlayed his military career into politics, a rising star with a reputation for toughness and patriotism. The irony was almost laughable. Jack flipped the photo over, where a string of numbers was scribbled in Michael's handwriting. "What's this?" Lena's expression shifted, something like hope flickering in her eyes for the first time. "Coordinates. To a storage locker outside Fort Bragg. Michael said it was his insurance policy." Jack's pulse kicked up. If there was proof, their hard evidence, they could bring Riker down. But it wouldn't be easy. "They'll be watching it," he said. Lena nodded, probably. "But they don't know about this." She reached into her pocket and slid a small key across the table. "The lockers, under a fake name, paid in cash for 20 years. Michael thought of everything." Jack picked up the key, turning it over in his palm. It felt like holding a piece of Michael again, like his friend was reaching across time, trusting him to finish what he'd started. He looked up at Alina, her dark eyes fierce with a determination he recognized. "We're doing this then? We owe him that much." Outside, a car pulled into the lot, its headlights cutting through the diner's grimy windows. Jack tensed, but it was just an elderly couple, shuffling toward the entrance. Still, the moment lingered, a reminder that they weren't just digging up the past. They were stepping into a fight someone had already tried to bury. The road to Fort Bragg stretched endlessly before them, the highway cutting through the kind of small towns that looked abandoned even when they weren't. Jack kept one hand on the wheel and the other on the folded photo in his pocket, the edges digging into his thigh like a reminder of what they were up against. Alina sat in the passenger seat, her gaze fixed on the passing fields, though Jack could tell she wasn't really seeing them. Her mind was somewhere else, somewhere darker. She asked suddenly, her voice barely audible over the hum of the engine. Jack didn't answer right away. He'd spent years trying not to think about it, drowning the what-ifs in whiskey and bad decisions. But now, with the truth so close, it was impossible to ignore. "Yeah," he admitted. "Sometimes I think about how Michael would have been the one visiting my grave instead. How he'd have gone home, married you, maybe had kids." He glanced at her, catching the way her fingers tightened around the edge of her seat. "You ever think about that?" Elena's smile was thin, haunted. "Every day. But then I remember Riker took that future from us. And now he's out there giving speeches about honor and sacrifice while people cheer for him." Her voice cracked on the last word, and Jack didn't push. Some wounds didn't need salt. They reached the storage facility just after midnight, the place eerily quiet under the flickering glow of sodium lights. Jack killed the engine and studied the layout rows of identical metal units. A lone security camera pointed at the entrance. Too exposed. "We can't just walk in," he muttered. Alina was already digging through her bag. "Good thing I came prepared," she said, pulling out 2 black caps and a set of lockpicks. Jack raised an eyebrow. "You steal cars too?" She smirked, tossing him a cap. "Only when necessary." He moved quickly, sticking to the shadows, their footsteps silent on the asphalt. The locker was in the far corner, tucked between 2 larger units like it was hiding. Jack inserted the key, his breath catching as the lock clicked open. The door creaked as he lifted it, revealing stacks of file boxes and a single metal footlocker. Inside the footlocker was a trove of evidence photos. Mission reports with sections violently redacted and a small digital recorder. Jack pressed play, and Michael's voice filled the cramped space, younger than he remembered, but deadly serious. "This is Private First Class Michael Torres. Recording on October 12, 2003. Captain Riker is working with the enemy. I have proof. If you're hearing this, I'm probably dead, and he's probably covered it up. Don't let him get away with it." The recording cut to static, then resumed with coordinates, names, dates enough to bury Riker 10 times over. Jack's hands shook. This was it. The truth, raw and unfiltered. But then Alina stiffened, her hand clamping down on his arm. "Jack," she whispered. Outside, gravel crunched under heavy boots. Someone was coming. Jack shoved the recorder into his pocket and motioned for Alina to hide behind the boxes just as a flashlight beam sliced through the darkness. "This unit's supposed to be empty," a man's voice growled. Jack recognized it instantly. Sergeant Vince Holloway, Riker's right-hand man back in Iraq. Now, here he was, 20 years later, still cleaning up his boss's messes. Left and right? Jack held his breath. Then, from somewhere outside, a car alarm blared. Elena's doing, timed perfectly. Holloway cursed and bolted toward the noise. Jack didn't hesitate. "Go now," he hissed, grabbing Elena's hand as they sprinted for the car. Behind them, Holloway's shouts faded into the night, but Jack knew this wasn't over. Had the evidence, but Riker's people were onto them. And now, there was no turning back. The motel room was a dim, claustrophobic box that smelled of stale cigarettes and industrial cleaner. But it was the safest place Jack could think of on short notice. The kind of no-name roadside stop where cash was still king and questions were non-existent. He bolted the door behind them and immediately dragged the flimsy dresser in front of it, the wood screeching against the cheap linoleum. Alina didn't comment, already pulling the curtains shut with a sharp yank before collapsing. Onto the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she spread the contents of the footlocker across the scratchy comforter. Photos, maps, handwritten notes, and Michael's tight script was all there, a damning mosaic of betrayal. Jack paced the narrow space between the beds, his mind racing. Holloway's appearance changed everything. If Riker had sent him to surveil the storage unit, it meant they were expected. It meant Riker knew someone might come looking. This wasn't just some random op for him, Jack muttered, picking up a grainy surveillance photo of Riker accepting a thick envelope from a shadowy figure. He was building a fucking empire. Elena's voice was hollow. Michael was about to blow it all up. She held up a single sheet of paper, a bank statement with transactions flagged in red. Offshore accounts. Millions. This isn't just about Iraq. He's still doing it right now. Jack's phone buzzed in his pocket and he tensed. Only 3 people had this number and 2 of them were dead. The screen flashed unknown caller. He hesitated, then answered, putting it on speaker. No greeting, just a voice that sent ice down his spine. Sergeant Delaney. Captain Riker. Even after 20 years, that tone smug, condescending. Like he was still giving orders made Jack's fists clench. You've got 5 seconds to tell me why I shouldn't have you buried next to Torres, Riker continued, calm as a man discussing the weather. Jack forced his voice steady. 'Cause I've got copies of everything. Photos, recordings, the works. You touch us, and it goes public. A beat of silence. Then Riker laughed, low and humorless. You always were dramatic, Delaney. But fine, let's talk. You want justice for Michael? Meet me alone, he rattled off, and address a private airfield outside Raleigh and hung up before Jack could respond. Alina was already shaking her head. It's a trap. Jack knew she was right. But he also knew Riker wouldn't risk exposure unless he was desperate, and desperate men made mistakes. I'll go, he said. But you're getting that evidence to the press. The real press, not some corporate puppet. He scribbled a name on a motel notepad. Lena Reyes, investigative journalist. Washington Post. She's got a Pulitzer and a death wish. She'll run with this. Alina stared at him, her eyes blazing. And what happens to you? Jack didn't answer. The airfield was a sprawling stretch of cracked tarmac under a moonless sky. It's the kind of place where deals were made and bodies disappeared without a trace. Jack parked his truck a mile out and approached on foot, the weight of his sidearm a cold comfort against his ribs. He'd left Alina at a safe house with strict orders. If I'm not back by dawn, send the files. But as he moved through the tall grass bordering the runway, every instinct screamed that he wouldn't be walking away from this. A single hangar loomed ahead, its rusted doors partially open, yellow light spilling onto the concrete. Inside, Riker waited, flanked by 2 men Jack didn't recognize private security, judging by their earpieces and tailored suits. The captain hadn't aged well. His once sharp jawline had softened into jowls, his hair thin to a silver buzz. But his eyes were the same, calculating, devoid of remorse. Right, Delaney, Riker said, spreading his arms like they were old friends. I'd say it's good to see you, but we're past lies, aren't we? Jack didn't move from the doorway, hand hovering near his hip. Where's Holloway? Riker smirked. Vince got sloppy. Had to retire him. The casual admission of murder hung in the air. Jack's fingers twitched. You killed Michael, sold out your own men. For what? Money. Riker sighed. As if disappointed by the simplicity of the question, for power, money's just the means. You think wars are won by patriots? They're won by men who understand the game. He pulled a cigar from his pocket, taking his time to light it. But you're not here for a philosophy lesson. You're here because you think you've got leverage. He blew smoke toward the ceiling. You don't. A door creaked behind Jack. He spun, drawing his gun only to freeze. Alina stood there, her hands raised, Holloway's pistol pressed to her temple by a hulking guard. Her face was bloodied, her shirt torn at the collar. Riker chuckled. You really thought I wouldn't track her? She's been a thorn in my side. For years, Jack's vision tunneled, his grip on the gun shaking. He'd walked right into the trap, and now Alina would pay for it. But then Alina winked. Just a flicker so fast he almost missed it. His pulse stuttered. A play. She's making a play. Riker took another drag, oblivious. Here's what's going to happen. You give me the files. I might let her live. Or you die, heroes, and I burn the evidence anyway. Your choice. Jack forced a sneer, buying time. You're forgetting one thing. Copies. Riker rolled his eyes. Please. You're a washed-up jarhead, not Jason Bourne. Ow. The guard tightened his grip on Elena's hair, yanking her head back. She gasped, then drove her elbow into his gut, twisting free as the gun went off, the shot ricocheting off the hangar walls. Chaos erupted. Jack fired twice, dropping the suited men as Alina scrambled behind a fuel drum. Riker dove for cover, shouting into a radio. Reinforcements. They were out of time. Jack lunged for Alina, pulling her behind a stack of crates as bullets tore into the metal around them. The files. She panted, pressing a hand to her bleeding lip. Gone. I sent them. He stared at her. What? She grinned, fierce and bloody. While you were playing decoy, Lena Reyes has everything. A engine roared outside, not reinforcements, but a news van, its satellite dish spinning, cameras already rolling. Riker's face went slack with horror. You bitch, he snarled, raising his pistol. Jack didn't think. He shot Riker. Center mass, the captain crumpling like a puppet with cut strings. The gunfire stopped. The world held its breath. Then the hangar doors burst open, reporters swarming in, flashes exploding like fireworks. Alina sagged against Jack, her whisper, barely audible over the shouting. It's over. But as the camera zoomed in on Riker's body, Jack knew the truth. Some wounds never close. Some debts are only paid in blood. The morning mist clung to the cemetery like a shroud as Jack stood once more before Michael's grave. It's the freshly turned earth near Riker's plot still visible on the far hill, a stark reminder that some ghosts could only be laid to rest with violence. The media storm had been brutal. Congressional hearings, stripped medals, the unearthing of more betrayals than anyone wanted to believe. But for Jack, the noise faded here, in this quiet patch of grass where it had all begun. He knelt, placing a new flag beside the headstone, this one crisp and unbroken. Got him, brother, he murmured, the words thick in his throat. The wind carried no answer, but for the first time in 20 years, the silence didn't feel like an accusation. Behind him, Elena's footsteps crunched on the gravel, slower now, her ribs still healing from Holloway's fists. She carried a small box, its contents unknown even to Jack. You ready? She asked, her voice softer now, less haunted. He nodded, rising stiffly, his body protesting like an old house in a storm. All creaks and groans from wounds he'd stopped counting. Alina opened the box, revealing a stack of yellowed envelopes. Tied with string? Michael's letters. The ones they didn't let me keep. She handed the top one to Jack, the paper fragile as a moth's wing. This one's for you. The date on the envelope froze as blood the day before the ambush. Inside, a single sheet, Michael's handwriting rushed but legible. Jack, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Don't waste time on guilt. You were the best of us. Do me a favor, look after Alina. She's carrying our kid. Yeah, you're an uncle, you bastard. And tell that kid I love them even if I never got to meet them. The world tilted. Jack's knees hit the dirt, the paper trembling in his hands. A child. Michael's child. All these years. Lena's hand settled on his shoulder, her touch. Featherlight. Her name's Sophia, she whispered. She's 19, pre-law. Looks just like him. The grief and joy hit Jack like a bullet to the chest, the pain so sharp it blurred into something like grace. In the distance, a young woman approached, her dark curls bouncing with each step, her smile tentative but bright. Sophia, Jack's breath caught. She had Michael's eyes, his stubborn chin, the same way of standing like she was bracing for a fight. Mom said it was time, Sophia said, glancing between them. Time for what? Jack rasped. Elena's tears fell freely now. To finish the story, Sophia pulled a folded newspaper from her bag, today's edition, the headline screaming, "Decorated Colonel's crimes exposed." Dan laid it gently on Michael's grave. "Hi, Dad," she murmured. "We won." The wind picked up, rustling the pages like a sigh of relief. Jack wrapped an arm around Sophia's shoulders, pulling her close, feeling the weight of 2 decades lift as the sun broke through the clouds. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't an ending. 3 months later, new headstone appeared beside Michael's. Captain Daniel Riker. No honors. Sophia Delena Torres enrolled at Georgetown. Her admissions essay titled "The Cost of Truth." Every Memorial Day, Jack and Elena returned to the cemetery, not with flags.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.